Hello, Blake Rudis here, and welcome to day 20 of the 30 Days to Photoshop Mastery. And today we're going to be talking about layer transformations. Now, layer transformations can be kind of confusing because you're thinking to yourself, well, why are we going to transform a layer? Well, it's more like document transformation and sometimes layer transformation depending on what needs to be done. So we're going to talk about things like rotating and scaling, resizing to make two documents match up, and we're going to do that through some realistic application. The best way to talk about this is through realistic application. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this image that says transform for sky replacement, and then also this one which is transform for sky replacement 2. Basically what I'm going to teach you how to do here is replace this sky with this guy. But there's a couple things that we need to think about when we're doing that, and a lot of that has to come down to image sizes. So there's a hotkey on Photoshop that is Command or Control R, okay? So if you press Command or Control R, it's going to make rulers along the top. Now, this depiction is in pixels, so it's basically 0 to 2000 pixels. Command or Control R, this is 0 to 4000 pixels. Now that's really important to know, because if we wanted to replace this guy with this guy here, one thing we need to do is get one document on top of the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this image, press the V key, press and hold Shift while I grab this image. That will make sure that as I press and hold Shift and move it from one image to the other, it will make sure that it centers them from the middle. So I'll grab this image, move it over here, press and hold Shift, and release that click. Now what you're going to see is it looks like we zoomed into this photo, doesn't it? I mean, here, this portion of the photo is right here that we're seeing really big in front of us. And why is that? Well, the reason why we're seeing that, and if we move this around, this image is so much bigger than this image, is because this document space that we just moved from one image to the other is bigger than the canvas of the image that we're working on. So this background image is relatively small compared to this foreground image. And we can tell that if we go up to Image and go to Image Size. Now what this is telling us in the image size is that this image that we're working with is 2000 pixels by 1334 pixels. And we can see that right here. It's 2000 by 1334. If we go to this image and we go to Image and we go to Image Size, you can see here that this is 4000 pixels by 2667 pixels. So this image is actually double the size of the other one. You can also see that here in the properties right here. You can see the properties over here, and that tells you what your canvas size is as well. So what that means is that this image is so much bigger than our other one. That's why they don't fit in the same space together. I'm just kind of clicking this and dragging it around. There is a way that we can get this photo to match the background size though. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to press Command or Control T, and then I'm going to press Command or Control 0. And what that does, by pressing Command or Control T, it gets me into transform mode. And because today we're talking about transformations, this is where we get to move, size, scale, rotate our photo. So pressing Command or Control 0 shows us the outer bounds of just how much bigger this photo is than the background image. So the sky photo is twice the size of our other image, but it's really not twice the size. If we move this over here, it's almost 4 times the size. Okay, you see that? We can basically fit 4 of our background images into one of these sky images, but we need the sky image to fit into the background. So how do we do that? Well, this is where we go into the transform mode. So I can click and hold on this upper left-hand corner, and that will help me drag this in from the top. I'll go ahead and match that up. So that as I click and move inside of here, it's going to move this layer around. And I'm going to click over here and drag this up over here, and that will help me get this resized to fit inside this image. So now we've basically transformed and scaled this image to fit the image that we want to work with. I said I'm using practical application here because a lot of times when you're going to do any type of sky replacement, you're going to run into this exact issue. The sky that you want to bring in is either going to be bigger or it's going to be smaller than the document that we're working with. So I'll go ahead and press Enter to commit that. And then I can go over to my zoom tool, click on that, right click, and say Fit on Screen. Okay, so now we have this document that's the exact same size as our background document. However, there could come a time too, let's press Command or Control T again. I'm going to press and hold Alt while I do this, that your image that you're bringing in is this size. and you need it to fit into that background. Well, just know that if you're going to be duplicating an image like this or making it larger or making it smaller, you're going to have a reduction in pixels because of that, okay? It's either going to interpolate, which is take those pixels. If we're trying to blow something up, it's going to take those pixels, and as you tell it to blow up, it's going to interpolate pixels or make pixels exist where they didn't exist, so you could get some artifacting in that. So just know that just because you can make an image bigger doesn't necessarily mean that you can make that image the size of a billboard without any repercussion. Okay, so let's just make this the same size of this photo. We're good to go here. Let's do a quick sky replacement here. So how I would do this is I would click on this background layer. I would then take my quick selection tool and just move this quick selection tool around on this background layer to get all of the sky in place. Now, if I don't want some of these buildings in there, I'll just press Alt or Option and then click on the areas that I don't want that building or buildings to be grabbed from. And you can see that that's happening here on this church. This is in a place called Saint-Emilion in France. Some of the best wine I've ever had here, man. It's amazing. Great place. Okay, and then we'll just, that looks pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. Okay. So now what I would do to get this sky replacement done is I would just go to select and mask, as we've seen many times before. I would then turn on the smart radius, increase this radius, okay, and then draw with my refine edge tool along the edges of these buildings. And you know, when you're doing these sky replacements, you would think that these have to be perfect masks, but they really don't. They don't have to be perfect, okay? I could just, this is good enough for me, really, okay? So now I'll press OK, and that'll generate a mask for me. So now if I click on this layer and turn this preview on, and then click the mask icon here, it's going to create a mask for me with that set of clouds. So you can see that this background sky is horrible, but by adding more sky to it, it automatically lifts this image and makes it really awesome. This is a really quick and easy sky replacement. I've done a whole course on sky replacements here on my F64 Elite website, but this is just the quick and dirty way to do a sky replacement. Now let's talk about scaling and transforming from here, okay? So if I turn the link off on here, as we've talked about before, I'm gonna unlink this mask from this image. Now the reason why is because let's say I want to get this moved around and get this right where I want it to be. If this is left linked and I move this around, it's going to move the mask along with the sky. And we don't want that. So I'll go back to my history here, and then I'll just make sure that that's undone, or press Command or Control Z to undo that. So if I move that layer, it's moving the layer and the mask at the same time, right? But if I unlink this and then I click on this layer, not the mask, I can now move this layer around. So that means I can make this, move it up to get that to fit the transformation that I need. I could press Command or Control T, and I could rotate this now to get these clouds exactly where I want to be by clicking on the outside and moving. You see that little handle, it looks like it's going curvy to the left and to the right. Now I'll just move that so it's like that. And then if I press and hold Shift down here, I can free transform this in a way where I can get these clouds to fit exactly where I want to be. If I don't hold Shift and just click on that corner, it's going to scale it automatically based on the aspect ratio of the photo. So I can get these clouds exactly where I want to be in this photo. I think if I skew them about this way, then that should work, okay? So that's one way that we can use transformations as a practical application here. What did we show with this type of transformation? Well, we showed scaling by making this larger or smaller. We press Command and Control T and then Command and Control 0 to see the outside bounds of this image. You see that when we do that, we still have all of this imagery left here that we could use in this photo. So move this around. This is really helpful when we're doing sky replacements here, because we can get the perfect sky that we want behind these buildings. Now this was a wide angle shot, so I might want to go with a wider look. These clouds appear way too close and make us almost feel like this place is up in heaven, whereas this makes it feel like they're more on earth as those clouds transition back from the city. Okay, so that looks pretty good. You know, this is just a quick and dirty on a sky replacement here. Really quick sky replacement that actually looks pretty successful here for this photo. Again, there's many different ways that you can do a sky replacement. I've done a whole course on that alone, but I want to move on to the next one. Okay, so I'm going to minimize these. The next one is going to be transform for warping objects. Now there might come a time where you are photographing with a wide angle lens like I was here. And what you can see in this wide angle lens is as we get closer to the edge of the lens, we're going to incur this distortion here where it really is going to grab things and pull them and distort them into the corners. That's because a wide angle lens is meant to get everything it can into the scene. So it does that by kind of warping what it sees as it comes in. Well, now we need to kind of fix that warp. So this is a way that I use transformations to fix a crooked or warped building in my wide angle shots. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the marquee tool and I'm going to grab a big space around here. Now, it is important to make sure that you have a big space around the object that you're trying to warp. It'll make it easier for us to blend in the future. Now, if I press Command or Control J, that is going to duplicate exactly what we just selected there from that background layer. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to warp this in a way that this back edge is straight, because this barn was straight, but there's a bunch of problems with it. So here I'm going to grab over here. If I press Command or Control R to get my rulers back on, I'm going to click inside this ruler, click inside of it, and drag it over. Now these are what we call temporary guides. And these temporary guides do a really good job of lining up exactly what should be straight in this photo. So when I click in over here and move it over to here, you can see just how non-straight this building is, right? So I'll click right here and drag this down to here to see where my horizontals are and if they are straight. And they look pretty good on the top and the bottom here of that building. What really looks off about this building, though, are going to be the sides. Okay, so let's go down to the base of it as well here, maybe to the top of that door. Okay, so this will help us maintain how we want this building to be shaped when we go to transform it. So how I'm going to transform this is I'm going to press Command or Control T. Now that's going to get me into that free transform mode. So what we talked about here was just grabbing the outside and making this larger or smaller when we were talking about the sky replacement. I'll press Command and Control Z to get back to where I was. But now what I want to talk about is how you can grab these handles on the outside edges and free transform them in a way that it does it in kind of a perspective-based warp. Now at any time, if you did want to use a different type of transformation, if you go to Edit and then here under Transform, you're going to see Scale, Rotate, Skew, Distort, and Perspective. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a skew transform, but I'm not going to use this dialog here. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to press Command or Control and hold that. And when I do that, you're going to see that the cursor changes from that arrow that can make this larger and smaller to a white arrow or black arrow. What that allows me to do is click on one of these outside corners and transform and warp this image in. You see how I've automatically now fixed that straight line there? So I'm going to grab this side, Command or Control, and press and hold that Command or Control while I do this, and pull this out until that edge of the building gets straight. You see how my building's getting straight now? Now when I do that, it's also going to kind of squish this a little bit. So what we need to take into consideration is how much of our horizon line now has been altered. So I'm not going to press Command or Control this time. I'm going to press and hold Shift. I'm going to press and hold Shift and click on this middle. It's going to allow me to make this building a little bit taller, okay, so that it doesn't look like we just made it fatter, okay? And that looks actually pretty good. So I'm going to press Enter, okay? And now I'm going to move this around. But the way I'm going to move this around is not necessarily with the Move tool like you've seen me before. Because I have this layer selected, I can nudge this by using the left, right, up, and down arrow keys. So I'm going to press V for my Move tool, and then press the left arrow key to move this over to get that building where it should be straight right there where it was before, and then move this up because those guides are telling me where the other building was before. Right? These guides were built based off of that exact building that we had before, so we can see the straight line here, the straight line here, and this straight line over here. If you want to get rid of the guides because they've worked, they've done their job, you've skewed this to the way you need it, you can press Command or Control H, and that will get rid of those guides. But now we have a problem, don't we? Look at the area around the building. You see that we have a hard edge there? Well, how I'm going to fix that is I'm going to add a mask here, and then I'm going to press B for my brush tool. And with the brush that I have selected, or any brush, it could be actually one of these soft edge brushes, it'd be perfect for this. I'll make my brush a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to paint away with the color black. So I'll press B for my brush tool, D to default my colors to black and white down here, and then X to switch over to black. I'm using a lot of hotkeys here, and my flow is at 50% from the last brush I used, and my opacity were off. So I'm going to make that 100% on both. And then I'm just going to paint along this edge. And you can see that we don't need to do much here. We just need to paint just a little bit on that edge to get them to blend together. And once we get them to blend together, it really fools the eye. And it looks like we didn't do anything, but look at how we skewed that building to make it more straight. Now what I'm seeing though, is if I press Command or Control H again to get my guides back, that now I've kind of skewed the front of this building right here a little bit. That's okay. If I uncheck this mask right here and then click on this layer right here, I can press Command or Control T, and then I can just press and hold Control while I scooch that out a little bit. Scooch is a technical term. Press Command Control H, and look at that. Perfect. Now we have perfect straight lines. And this building doesn't look like it's warping into the sun. It looks like it actually belongs where it is right here in this landscape photo. And that was done through transformation, but transformation in more of a skew or warp type of way, where we're taking that building and we're getting it back to where it should be. Now there are some automated tools that you can try to do this in Photoshop. I don't think they're very successful. The most success I've ever had with straightening buildings out has been on my own, using my own custom techniques, which is just what you saw here. Make a selection around that background of the thing that we want to distort and get back to the way it should be, duplicate it, skew it or alter it, rotate it, whatever you need to do, make it larger, make it smaller, whatever that might be, and using those guides to straighten things up, and then put the mask around there and you're good to go. So it looks like this is a little bit off back here. See that? We're a little bit off back there. So I'm going to just click V for my move tool and then arrow key up a little bit. Okay. And that should fix it. We're good now. So anytime we do that altering of the pixels there, we want to make sure that we look around to make sure that the area around it doesn't have anything that's going to tell the viewer that, hey, we did something there. Now, this isn't really like, you're not falsely doing anything. You're actually making this more real to what your eyes would see, but your camera doesn't see it this way because we're using a wide angle lens to get this type of shot. You see that? It looks so much better when we fix that wide angle perspective warp that we were getting there before. Again, doing it manually is going to be your best option. So this image is actually taken from Zion National Park, and if you've ever been there, this object back here is actually called the Watchman. Now, the Watchman is this giant monolithic structure of a rock. It's huge, but it doesn't look very big in this photo. So what we're going to do, and the reason why, is because I used a wide angle lens here to get as much of this stream in here and also get the Watchman in the background. And by using that wide angle lens, I made the sacrifice of the size of this structure back here, because anything that's far away from a wide angle lens is going to push it further back. So what I'm going to do with this photo is I'm actually going to make the Watchman back here appear larger than it actually is. Okay. And we're going to do that in a very clever way. So what I need to do here is make a series of masks for this first though. I'm going to uncheck this little lock that you saw there, and I'm going to make a selection that's going to be for the sky and also for the Watchman. So I'm just going to make this selection around the sky and the Watchman here. And this doesn't have to be that perfect of a selection here. It just has to be good enough. Now that I've made that selection, I'm going to press Command or Control, Shift, and I, which that's going to invert the selection. Because what I need to do with this is I need to make a mask on here. So I'm going to click on this icon right here to make a mask, which is going to make my background disappear. And you're like, what, Blake, that doesn't make this bigger. It makes it disappear. And you're right. But now I'm going to take this layer, I'm going to press Command or Control J. And then on this mask, I'm going to press Command or Control I. Now what this will allow me to do is it will allow me to place this layer basically underneath this one. And when I place this layer underneath this one, I can then move this around underneath that mask. So what I'm going to do with this layer is I'm going to turn the lock off, the link off here, press Command or Control T, which will get me into the resize mode. Now, if I press the Alt or Option key and hold it while I click in a quarter, it's going to make this image larger. Okay. See how it's making it much larger. Now what I need to do though is, because I got the duplicated trees here, I just need to move this down just a hair like that. Okay. Just to get it right back to where those trees were. And then I can press Command or Control 0, Alt or Option, and make the Watchman bigger again. And then I might actually just grab this and pull this down behind these trees like this, so that those trees aren't showing there. Press Enter and commit to that. So if we go back to our history, here's the before, where the Watchman is really small, and here's the after, where we scaled up that Watchman to make it more realistic and larger. Okay, but at the same time, what we seem to have here is we have this little edge on this mask, because these masks don't line up perfectly. So what I'm going to do with that, because that's going to be this layer right here, is I'm just going to zoom in here, click on this mask, press B for my brush tool, and then I'm going to paint with white on the edge of this mask. Just paint with white. You see that? Just right on the edge of that mask. And this doesn't have to be perfect, folks. Okay? People will believe it. We're just trying to fake that thing getting bigger. All right, looks good. Okay, we'll go right along this edge here because the sky doesn't really matter. And we'll go over this side, paint along this edge with that mask. Basically, we're just adding to this. Oh, we got a little bit of overspray there. It's okay. We'll just brush that away. And we'll switch back over. Okay. And this might actually not even be there. That's why. Okay, that looks all right. That looks good. Okay. And then we'll just brush this away. Okay. Just blend it in. We're just blending these two areas. Oh, I might make this brush a little bit bigger so I can blend in that sky up there a little bit more. And then I need to press X to switch back over to black and then paint that in there like that. Okay. And then I'll click on my zoom tool, right click, fit on screen. Okay. Here's the before. Now looking at this mask up there, I might need to do a little bit more work up here on this mask. So I'm going to click on this mask, press B for my brush tool, make that brush a little bit larger, and then just paint with white to bring some of that back up there. Okay. Just blend it in. Just blending it in. See that? Okay. So now, if we look at the overall before of this by going to our history palette, here's the before. See how the Watchman is really small? Here's the after. The Watchman is much bigger. Before, after. We just scaled it up almost twice its size. Now, there are times when you're going to need to do this. When you're doing some landscape photography and something just appears too small and you want to make it bigger, this is the way to do that. But notice how I couldn't just show you this at the very beginning of everything. I had to show you this after I showed you how to use masking and masking in an effective way, making selections. So this was a combination of making selections, making masks, masks from selections, more importantly, and then making hand-painted masks to blend it in. So there's a lot of complex things that are happening here just to make that background or the Watchman appear a little bit taller. Now, what I would do from here is I would continue my workflow from here with this. And the way to do that would be to either flatten this down. So if we go to layer and we go to flatten image, that is going to take both of those layers and flatten them down and make it appear as if it never happened. That's one way we could do that. Or we could go back here and we could press Control Shift Alt and E or Command Shift Option and E on a Mac, and that will make what's called a stamped layer here. And this stamped layer is basically the combination of everything that happened below it. And then we could build up our workflow on top of that with things like curves adjustment layers, maybe gradient maps, or whatever that is that we're going to do to make this photo look better. But we have to start by enlarging the size of the Watchman first before we can do all of our build-up workflow to make this image even better than it is right now. So we talked about a lot today when it came to layer transformations. We talked about transformations when it came to image size and scaling, where we need two images that are being composited together to match up. Now, this isn't just something that you're going to use for sky replacements. Anytime you're taking one image on top of another image, the likelihood of them being the same size is next to none, okay? So you might have to do this image sizing, whether you're making that image larger or smaller, to fit into the composite space that you're trying to create. And a composite is basically just a composition of any two or more photos to create a one piece, essentially. So we're compositing. We did a couple different compositing things here. We actually, all of today was compositing. In the second example, we used the transformation feature and the skewing or the warping, the perspective, the correction that we needed to do on that wide angle lens to fix a crooked building. Now, that was also a composite because we made a duplicate copy of something that was in the image to create that shift. Okay, and we use Command or Control T with the Control key to grab those little handles and move them around. In this last image, we talked about scaling something up within a photograph by making a duplicate copy of it, doing some clever masking, and increasing the size of an object within the same image. So there's a lot to learn about transformations, and this is something that's going to take you a lot of practice. All right, you just saw me run through this pretty quickly here in the last 20 some minutes, but it's imperative that you work through this stuff. It's imperative that you take the time to do some deliberate practice with this. So your homework for this is to just use these images and try to do exactly what I did. And don't get frustrated if you can't do it. All right, this is just to introduce you to some problem-solving things that you're going to have to do in order to create the images that you want to create while you're here in Photoshop. In tomorrow's lesson, we're going to talk about filters in Photoshop. And that was actually the first place that I ever went when I started using Photoshop. And I was never using Photoshop for the right reasons. Okay. And maybe I'll show you some of that embarrassing work because I think I still have it. I just use filters for everything. But I'm going to show you ways that you can use filters that are really going to be helpful in your workflow.